I want to preface this video by saying you should probably pick up Metroid Dread if you haven't already. Judging by all the reviews I've seen of the game and its general reception so far, I am very much in the minority here. Most people think this game is a masterpiece, and I've seen endless people calling it their favorite game in the series. I just wanted to make this video to hopefully start a discussion and provide a different opinion on a beloved game, since anyone who wasn't blown away by Dread may feel completely alone in their opinion, which I know isn't a great feeling. I don't think Dread does anything terribly, and most of my criticisms are going to be met with an equal amount of praise, so yeah, Dread's a pretty good game. I just didn't love it. So I'm going to try to avoid spoiling anything major in this video. I will be showing some of the bosses, a late game mini boss, and a lot of Samus's arsenal, but I won't be showing anything about the last couple of bosses, areas, or upgrades, and I won't be spoiling any major plot points. The game opens up with a great little plot recap to get people up to speed. Then Samus is told that the all-consuming shape-shifting parasite X is still alive on the planet ZDR. The Galactic Federation sent a bunch of robots called Emmys to scout out the planet, and they haven't been heard from since. Samus then goes to eradicate those forbidden gummy snacks once and for all. When you arrive, you're attacked by a BBC, a big bad Chozo, named Ravenbeak. You pass out, wake up, and then are told by your AI buddy Adam to reach the surface and get back to your ship. It's a nice little setup that introduces a new big bad and leaves plenty of room for intrigue, but unfortunately that's all the story you'll be getting until the last quarter of the game. Ravenbeak doesn't make another appearance until the very end, and up until the very last chunk of the game your only objective is to just leave. It makes your goal feel a bit pedestrian, and I only bring this up because the last chunk of the game is fantastic in the story department. It feels a bit fanfiction-y overall, but I was genuinely excited to see what would happen next when the story got going. When the camera pans out and you get to control Samus for the first time, you'll almost immediately recognize how fantastic it feels in the gameplay department. Samus is quick, precise, and I never once felt like the game was doing anything I didn't want it to. The slide should be a new series staple with how natural and fun it feels, and it makes navigating the world feel way more fluid since you don't have to stop in your tracks to morph ball through every small opening. I still don't really love the way free aim works, and I wish there was a way to remap the controls, but I never experienced any real issues. Yes, I know you can rebind the controls of the Switch itself, but that changes it for every game, and I got Smash Bros. To play.
Mei Ling, Samus took her clothes off.
One thing I do really love is the animation work in Dread. From simple things like how Samus braces herself on walls when you press against them, to how she's characterized in cutscenes through gestures alone. I really enjoyed Samus's character, and I was glued to the screen during all of the cutscenes. As for the combat, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. The parry from Samus Returns. Overall, I do like the mechanic, but it feels like it doesn't yet fit into Metroid's gameplay in a way that feels organic. It feels like the combat in general is kinda held hostage by it. Parrying an enemy instantly kills them, regardless of how comically large and durable they might be. You also get extra ammo and health from enemies that you parry. If you parry while running, it'll instead act as a melee attack, which had me excited at first before I realized it's practically worthless. Samus's overall damage with her arm cannon seems very low as well, which brings this all together into a formula that heavily encourages parrying enemies whenever you can. This leads to a lot of you killing your momentum while you stop in your tracks and wait for an enemy to attack you so you can insta-kill them and refill all your health and ammo. I do enjoy the parry system though. It creates an interesting bit of dynamic difficulty where you can create high-risk, high-reward scenarios for yourself if you choose to. In boss fights especially, choosing to hold your ground for an oncoming attack to hopefully create a window of damage for you is really intense, especially considering the ludicrous amount of damage attacks deal to you in this game. I would have liked the arm cannon and parry to be a bit more on par with one another as combat options, since it isn't until later in the game that it stops feeling a bit like a parry simulator. That's probably just how I decided to play the game though, and that could totally be on me. I'm interested to hear how you guys felt about the parry. Something you may have noticed from the gameplay going on is how great this game can look. Every now and again you'll pass through a room with a vast and detailed backdrop that just forces you to stop and appreciate it for a bit. The first two areas in the game don't have a crazy amount of visual flair to them outside of these rooms though, and I would have liked to see some of the beautiful map design from the later areas be a bit more present throughout the start of the game as well. I think these first areas make up for it though with the sheer amount of map there is to explore and how well it handles its puzzle design and its collectibles. The map is a bit of a nightmare to read though, since rooms will only be colored in through Samus's exact pathing through them. This means just about every room on the map will be halfway filled in, and if you've got OCD, then playing through this game might just be the death of you. Items that you already picked up will remain marked on the map as well, and both of these things combined can make it pretty annoying to hunt for secrets. Speaking on map design in general, I think Dread does a pretty bang-up job, honestly. There were plenty of times in my playthrough where I just drop everything I was doing and retread through the map looking for secrets. Once you're near the end of the game and have a full suite of abilities, scouring the map for secrets gets crazy addicting. I did find some of the later areas to be pretty small and underutilized, unfortunately, and each area being connected through a transporter into a loading screen made the map feel a bit disconnected, but I think there's some fantastic design here overall and plenty of fun exploration puzzles to be found. It really is a shame then that you get pretty railroaded in your progression through many parts of the game. One section near the end has you moving a completely linear path for quite a while, which really works in contrast to how much you want to explore with all of your recently gotten powers. The upgrades are a bit of a mixed bag for me as well. They're mostly great, but it felt like there were far too many that existed solely to open doors or blocks in the environment. Outside of the final morph ball bombs and missiles, the upgrades for the arm cannon, missile launcher, and morph ball never felt like they changed up the game in any interesting way. Some early upgrades like the flash shift have practical use in navigation and combat and feel like an awesome tool for your arsenal, whereas something like the phantom cloak or grapple beam are so narrow in their usage that it feels like wasted potential. A few upgrades were also used only a handful of times before being replaced. I will say though that the complete arsenal is a blast to use. I really wish you had more time with it, because exploration and combat are at their absolute best when you're in the end game. They definitely nailed that late game power fantasy that most Metroidvanias really rely on. Alright, I think it's time to address the elephant in the room, the staple feature of this game that I haven't talked about yet. The Emmys. Brace yourself, this next part is going to be pretty negative. I hate the inclusion of Emmys. There are 7 of these things in total, scattered throughout all the game's different areas. They're completely immune to all of your weaponry, and you have no choice but to run away from them and hope they don't bump into you for an instant kill. There's 2 small parry windows when they grab you, but not only are they ridiculously precise in the timing, the exact timing is randomized each time, so getting better at parrying them isn't very realistic. They roam around in their contained areas, but any action you do will let them hear you, which makes them immediately bolt to your location. You're given the Phantom Cloak early on to give you a chance at sneaking around the Emmys, but the cloak drains your energy and eventually your health. The camera also zooms in close so you can't get a good look at your surroundings, and your movement speed is slowed to a crawl. Standing still causes the energy to drain slower, but since it takes such a long time for the Emmys to survey the area and then move along, I never wanted to use the cloak. Even then, the second they've moved on, they'll hear you again the moment you start moving and be on top of you in no time. The game gives you a checkpoint at the entrance of each Emmy zone, so your best bet is to just blindly run through the entire area and hope to find their core, which after a quick fight lets you use a powerful cannon to destroy the Emmy and get a new power. The first Emmy you encounter is designed as more of a set piece where there's one curated path that you travel along, which was fine, and I was excited for what more they were going to do with the rest of the Emmys. Turns out literally all of them take place in visually identical rooms where you sprint around aimlessly hoping to find the one door that houses their core so you can blast them with the cannon. I was completely over this mechanic by the time I had finished the second Emmy, so you could imagine how much fun it was doing this exact thing over and over and over again. Each of these Emmys are meant to have an interesting gimmick that sets them apart, but they're so uninspired and rarely come into play while you're sprinting by them. The only 2 that had a noticeable mechanic were the 5th and 6th ones. The 5th has the ability to freeze you in place whenever it looks at you, even if it hasn't spotted you at all yet. Sweet. I know being stunned in video games is incredibly fun, but once you've cleared him out, you can finally move on to the 6th Emmy, who's definitely way more interesting than the 5th one. This one's ability is that he stuns you. I think their general design and the repetition of their encounters takes away any potential dread that these guys were meant to evoke. Continuous run-ins with the same invincible threat slowly drains away any initial tension that came from them chasing you. It's a lot like Mr. X in the Resident Evil 2 remake, who's at first a terrifying chase sequence, but eventually becomes nothing more than a groan-inducing roadblock. At least Mr. X had the decency to just clock you instead of killing you instantly. The Emmys don't have anywhere near the same impact that SAX had in Fusion, and I think curated gameplay moments work better for big threats like this. I personally would have liked Ravenbeak to make regular appearances throughout the game instead, a lot like SAX did, to help solidify him as some ever-present threat. I almost forgot he was even in the game until the ending. The Emmy zones are also huge, and they all have the exact same visual style. So much of the map is taken up by these areas, and them looking the same really pulls away from any of the diversity that goes into the areas surrounding them. I've heard pretty mixed reactions about the Emmys overall, so it's definitely a type of thing that you'll love or hate, but I sit squarely in the hate section. Let me know how you guys felt about them. Onto some brighter topics, the boss encounters in this game are definitely the biggest highlight for me. They all do a great job of making you utilize all of your abilities, and the last 2 bosses in particular were ridiculously fun to fight. If I had to nitpick, I'd definitely say each of these bosses needs another phase added onto it. It's more of a compliment than a nitpick since I'm basically just asking for more, but I feel like once you understand the boss's moveset, the fight is over in no time at all. The final boss in particular was the greatest part of the game for me. On my first attempt, I died near the end of the fight since I didn't know how to play around all these moves I've never seen before, which, obviously. On my second attempt, it felt like the boss was over before it even started. The game teases another phase to the boss, but it's really just a cinematic. I feel like a compromise could be made here where the bosses could deal a bit less damage with their attacks and each fight could last a bit longer. Not only would this give you more time with these amazing bosses, it would make finding those health upgrades feel a lot more worth it if the fights were more of a gauntlet. Either way, the boss fights are great. Add in a boss rush mode, please, I would love it. The mini-bosses, on the other hand, were largely hit or miss for me. I really enjoyed the fights against the Emmy cores, but alright, maybe a potential mini spoiler here. I'm going to talk about a mini boss near the end of the game. This stupid Chozo soldier was cool like 1 time. I counted 9 total times you've got to fight one of these guys, or a variation of them. At 2 separate points, you fight 2 at once, and the camera struggled so hard to keep up with the action that I wanted to pause the game afterwards to let the cameraman take a nap. They all have very simple movesets, and I didn't really find them enjoyable to fight. There's one point in time where you fight one of these guys, and then you have to fight them again within 5 minutes. God, I hate these guys. The last chunk of the game is still my favorite part by far, which really goes to show how great everything else is despite these stupid birds. One final thing I think needs mentioning is the length of this game. I beat it in 5.5 hours on my first playthrough, which for $60 is not great. I understand Metroidvanias are meant to be replayed, but when you have indie titles in this genre with far more content at half the price, it's hard to argue that Dread is content packed enough for its asking price. All in all, I think Metroid Dread is a good game. Every single gripe I have with it is met with another aspect that I really enjoyed. The good definitely outweighed the bad for me, but I had very high hopes for this game, since I've always been a huge fan of this series. Maybe my high expectations caused me to be a bit too critical of things, but I hope I've at least presented my criticisms in a way that seems reasonable. I'm eager to hear your guys' opinions on the game overall, so let me know if you agree or disagree with anything I've talked about here. If you just want to gush about how much you enjoyed the game, then I'd love to hear that as well. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll catch you later.